Okay, so this reading talked about levels of measurement, and there were two broad levels of measurement, and then within those levels of measurement, you had other sub-levels. Okay, so your categorical levels of measurements are those that are very distinct categories, and I gave you some examples. Cat or dog, dead or alive. I was going to say male and female, but you could even have male, female, transgender, non-identified. That would be categorical. You're categorizing people into those categories, and that would be considered nominal variables. All right, so you're putting them. It could be religious affiliation: Baptist, Church of Christ, Episcopalian, Catholic. That's nominal variables. So the only thing that you can do with nominal variable is look at frequency. Frequency is how often that occurs. So how many dogs and cats were there? How many Baptists were there? How many Church of Christ? It makes no sense to get an average of nominal variables. So the only thing you're going to report is how many. So when you guys get to your dissertation, you're going to collect demographic data. And that demographic data, some of it's going to be nominal variables. How many males, how many females were in your study? Which people were administrators, which people were not administrators? That's nominal data. Ordinal data, on the other hand, gives you some type of order, so it's one level up from nominal variables in that it is ranked data. So in this case, you can rank individuals. I always teach it, there's an order to this and there's a ranking to this. The problem with that is sometimes people see a ranking and they think, oh, that person is 2 times slower than the person who's ranked number 1. And that's not true, because when you start actually looking at the data, those rankings may have continuous values within them that ultimately allow that person to be ranked. Okay, so then the second category is your continuous, and your continuous have interval and ratio data. In both of these variables, both interval and both ratio, you have an equal interval between the numbers. Now, this may be a little confusing, but I want you to think about it. I use the word the space because that's just what I'm using. Okay, the space between the number 1 and by the time you get to number 2 is the same distance, or the same space between numbers 2 and number 3. All right, and what's good about that is now I can compare 1 against 2 and 2 against 3, because I'm comparing the same space or the same amount of values between those two. Okay, and he gives you some pretty good examples in the book there. The thing with the interval variable can go below 0. So just because I have a -2-degree temperature doesn't mean temperature has disappeared. All right, it's still very cold when it's -2, right? Or if I go outside and the temperature is 0, temperature hasn't disappeared, it's still there. Okay, versus ratio variable. Ratio variable has the same characteristics as interval variables. The difference here is that your ratio variable makes a little bit more sense because I do have an absolute 0. Okay, so when I measure something and I get a value of 0, that means that it is gone, that it is absent, it is not there. So my example I used was extreme. If I measured your heart rate and there is no heart rate, that means that person is not there. Now, if the person is breathing and talking to me and I'm not getting a heart rate and I'm reporting a value of 0, I'm going to question your ability to measure a person's heart rate. All right, so sometimes in your data collection, you might actually get a value of 0. And that may mean that that is absent, whatever that is, what you're measuring. And that's why it's really important that we look at what it is we're measuring. Okay, so those are your 4 levels of measurement: nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio. Why care about these levels of measurement? This is going to be really important when it comes to deciding what kind of analysis you're going to use when you have collected your data, preferably before. All right, so this is why I say, what are your dependent variables? How are you measuring them? And what is your level of measurement? Because that's going to determine the type of analysis that you do.